Greetings everyone. Today I am honored to share my reflections on one of the most profound and revolutionary analyses on Dr. Ambedkar's caste system in India. Baba Saheb writings, they stand as a hallmark of his intellectual brilliance and unwavering commitment to social reforms. He made a groundbreaking contribution to understanding the caste system through his seminal paper called Caste in India, Their Mechanism, Genesis and Development. This paper was presented on the 9th May 1916 at an anthropology seminar led by Dr. A. Goldenweiser at Columbia University. At any given time, it stands as a critical exploration of one of the most enduring and complex social structures in Indian society. It marked a pioneering effort to analyze the caste system not merely as a static institution but as a dynamic and evolving mechanism. The evolution of caste from Dr. Ambedkar's time to the present, it reflects persistent challenges. Caste manifests in today's world in both visible and hidden ways, despite legal protections and social reforms. Even today in rural India, caste-based segregation, it still influences access to land, access to education, and access to water resources. While urban areas, they reflect certain forms of exclusion in housing, workplaces, and social networks. Endogamy remains a stronghold of caste identity, reinforced through matrimonial ads and societal expectations. Caste-based violence and discrimination persist, with atrocities often targeting the insane, marginalized communities. In the present scenario, digital platforms, they have become both a space for anti-caste advocacy and a reflection of caste prejudices. Even in modern politics, caste continue to shape electoral strategies, policy making, and governance, highlighting its enduring influence in Indian society. So, even though this paper was written in 1916, still it remains profoundly relevant to contemporary society even in today in 2025. Because there is a saying, study the past if you would define the future, and those who don't know history are doomed to repeat the same mistake. Let's not repeat that mistake in this 2025. Let's want Baba Saheb's ideology. His words are eternal in his paper. He meticulously deconstructed the origin, growth, and perpetuation of caste in India. He offered a scientific and sociological perspective which challenged the prevailing narratives. He exposed the inherent inequalities. Of the caste system and presented a bold critique of its oppressive mechanisms. This paper aims to delve into Dr. Baba Saheb's insights, examining how caste remains a powerful force shaping modern Indian society. As we revisit his ideas today, they serve as both a lens to understand our past and a call to action for creating a more equitable future. Baba Saheb Ambedkar, he cleverly used an analogy to make us think about how we study society. He compared two things: exhibitions of material objects and the idea of showcasing human institutions like caste. Think of a museum exhibit understand the story behind those parks and buildings. We try to understand the story of the people who live there, their culture and their way of living. These objects are tangible. It means we can touch them and we can see them. So, they naturally spark our curiosity. Now imagine trying to exhibit something abstract like a social institution like caste system. Unlike physical objects, caste is not something we can hold in our hands or we can display in a glass case. It's a system of ideas, it's a system of beliefs and practices woven into our society. For many people, this concept might seem strange, vague, or even for them it is irrelevant. When they are not directly affected by this caste system, they think that it is irrelevant. But Baba Sahib argued that we should approach caste with the same curiosity and seriousness as we do when we study ancient ruins. Just as Bombay's ruins, they tell us about the civilization's history, caste tells us about how Indian society evolved over centuries. By studying it objectively, without bias or without emotional attachment, we can uncover its roots. We can uncover its mechanism and its impact on human behavior and social organization. For example, think of caste as an invisible framework shaping how people interact. Much like the foundation of a building determines its structure, you can't see the foundation outline. You can't see the foundation outline, but it affects everything. It affects the foundation, affects everything above it. Similarly, caste operates in ways that are deeply embedded in our society, influencing opportunities, influencing networking, influencing relationships, and influencing power dynamics. Baba Sahib urged us to uncover and analyze this hidden framework with the same intellectual curiosity we would apply to something like Pompeii. Baba Sahib recognized. He recognized the caste system as an ancient and deeply entrenched institution in India. He highlighted its dual complexity. It has both practical and theoretical complexity. Practically, caste has caused enormous social harm by segregating communities and limiting social interactions. Its rigid structure ensures that intermarriage and social mingling are virtually impossible because this system created barriers that persist even if these people migrate beyond India. Dr. Ambedkar erroneously predicted. He predicted that the caste system, if left unchecked, it could evolve into a global issue, transcending its origins in India to impact societies worldwide. His foresight finds resonance in recent global developments such as the landmark decision by Constitutional US Court on March 8, 2024. It affirmed Seattle's ban on caste-based discrimination. This historic ruling marks as a significant milestone in the fight against caste-based injustice, highlighting how Ambedkar's warnings they continue to hold relevance as the world grapples with the pervasive reach of caste hierarchies beyond national boundaries. Theoretically, caste has puzzled scholars. It puzzled scholars for centuries, defying efforts to fully unravel its origins and workings. Ambedkar acknowledged this difficulty but expressed confidence that with persistence it could be understood. The origins of caste system could be understood. His optimism reflected his belief that unraveling the caste system's mechanism essential for dismantling the same caste system. As Ambedkar, he delved deeper. He confined his study to specific aspects of caste, the genesis, mechanism, and spread of the system. He believed that caste was not merely a social division, but a calculated mechanism that ensured the perpetuation of inequality. It was a tool. It was a tool for maintaining control, maintaining power, and maintaining privilege within specific social groups. It was deliberately engineered system, and its development was far from organic. Ambedkar's analysis. His analysis urged us to question the socio-religious foundations of caste and recognize its ability to adapt and persist even in the face of modernity. For Baba Saheb, caste was not just a local issue. It was not just a local issue confined to India, but a potential source of global social disruption. He is called to examine the caste system with objectivity and a scientific lens. It remains relevant even today. His work challenges us to confront the institution of caste not only as a historical artifact, but as a living, breathing force that continues to influence millions of people today. In understanding Ambedkar's thesis on his paper, we are reminded of the urgent need for social reform, which is rooted in equality and justice, to create a society where caste ceases to divide and diminish the human spirit. Dr. Baba Saheb Ambedkar, he analyzed the caste system in India by beginning with an observation. An observation about the country's population. He started his findings. He started his observation with country's population. According to ethnologists, our population is a blend of Aryans, blend of Dravidians, blend of Mongolians and Scythians. These groups, he explained, Baba Saheb Ambedkar explained, these people migrated to India from different regions and cultures during their tribal phases. Their entry into the subcontinent was marked by conflict with those who came before them. But over time, these people with different backgrounds, they coexisted as neighbors and gradually developed a shared culture. Ambedkar explains, this common culture became the unifying factor for India. Yet, a complete physical amalgamation among these groups did not occur. Only shared culture unified them. He pointed out that, Baba Saheb Ambedkar pointed out that regional differences in appearance are clearly visible, such as those between people in the north and people in the south, or the people in the east and the people in the west. However, he emphasized that physical similarity is not the true marker of unity in any society. Instead, cultural unity is the foundation of homogeneity. And in this respect, Baba Saheb believed that no country could rival India. Dr. Ambedkar observed. He observed a paradox. He observed a paradox in the caste system which made it uniquely troubling. This paradox made us trouble. Normally, if Indian society were made up of entirely separate and distinct groups, like isolated islands with no shared culture, in this scenario, caste divisions might be easier to understand, as they would simply reflect natural separation. However, in Indian society is not like that. It is not classified into different islands. It is culturally unified with shared traditions, with shared customs, and with shared beliefs binding people together. Despite this unity, the caste system fragments society into rigid hierarchical groups. This creates a contradiction. How can a society that shares so much, they can be language, they can be religion, they can be customs, how can they be so deeply divided? Ambedkar argued that this fragmentation is not accidental or natural, but it is a deliberate fragmentation. The caste system actively carves divisions into a society that is otherwise homogeneous, turning what could be a cohesive community into segregated and hierarchical segments. This deliberate segmentation is what makes caste so difficult to explain and even harder to dismantle. It divides people. It divides people from within a shared cultural space rather than separating naturally distinct groups. Think of a single cake which has been cut into unequal slices, with each slice treated as if it belongs to a different category, even though they all come from the same cake. The cutting itself is the deliberate act of fragmentation, just as caste divided or just as caste divides an otherwise united society. To understand caste, one must examine this process of internal division. Drawing upon definitions by various scholars like Emily Senat, Baba Saheb evaluated the perspectives critically. Emily Senat, he was a French Indologist. He was one of the early scholars who examined the caste system in India. In his analysis, Senat viewed caste as a fundamentally religious institution. He believed that caste arose from a ritualistic foundation where notions of purity and pollutions were centered. According to Senat, caste was sustained by strict rules of endogamy, means marriage within one's own caste, occupational exclusivity, and a rigid hierarchy enforced by religious and social norms. Senat also emphasized the role of dharma, which means duty, in maintaining the caste system. He argued that each caste was assigned specific duties and responsibilities which were religiously sanctioned and socially reinforced. In Senat's view, this element of caste with religious ideology made it an enduring and deeply embedded institution in Indian society. However, in his paper, Baba Saheb criticized this perspective. While acknowledging the importance of purity and pollution, Dr. Ambedkar argued that caste was not purely a religious phenomenon. It was also a social, economic, and political construct. Baba Saheb believed that caste was deliberately created and perpetuated to maintain social hierarchies and power imbalance. Dr. Ambedkar challenged the idea that caste could be explained solely through religion, highlighting its broader systemic implications. Dr. Ambedkar believed that caste, at its core, it operates as a social mechanism, not merely as a religious phenomenon. Similarly, definitions by scholars like Mr. Nesfield, Sarich Risley, and Dr. Ketkar, they highlighted aspects such as endogamy, hereditary membership, and exclusionary practices. Dr. Ambedkar noted that while these definitions collectively shed light on caste, they each missed the broader picture by treating caste as an isolated phenomena rather than understanding its interconnectedness within the caste system as a whole. Dr. Ambedkar emphasized that caste in India is a unique and complex phenomenon, with its essence rooted in the practice of endogamy. He assures that exogamy, which means intercaste marriages, exogamy can dissolve caste boundaries, while anthropologists may argue that endogamy is a feature in many societies without leading to the creation of caste. Ambedkar explained that the situation in India is distinct due to its cultural homogeneity. Over centuries, India's various racial and ethnic groups have blended, forming a population with shared cultural characteristics. Despite this cultural unity, caste persists as a system that artificially fragments the population into rigid, exclusive units through the enforcement of endogamy. Ambedkar argued that endogamy was superimposed on an originally exogamous population, meaning that rules of marriage that previously encouraged fusion and integration were deliberately replaced with the rules that enforced separation. This entire process required strict regulation of marriages to prevent intermingling, which, if left unchecked, it could dissolve the caste boundaries. Baba Sahib further elaborated that maintaining endogamy posed challenges such as addressing disparities in the number of marriageable men and women within the same caste. Dr. B.R. Ambedkar critically examined the measures. He examined the measures that caste adopted to address the numerical disparity between men and women, particularly focusing on the concept of endogamy. And the concept of endogamy, which lies at the core of the caste system. Baba Sahib suggested that surplus women were seen as a threat to the caste closed structure. Two main solutions emerged for dealing with these women. The first was the brutal and inhuman practice of sati, burning the widow on her deceased husband's funeral pile, which eliminated the issue altogether by permanently removing her from the social fabric. However, this method, though extreme, it was not always feasible or enforceable. The second solution is, it is more practical. The second one is more practical solution. It was to enforce lifelong widowhood, ensuring that these women neither remarried outside the caste nor competed with the potential brides within their own caste. Yet, this approach, while comparatively human, it resulted in degrading widows to a marginalized state, stripping them of dignity and increasing their vulnerability to exploitation. Similarly, surplus men posed a distinct challenge. They were considered valuable assets to the caste, and their celibacy or renunciation was neither desirable nor sustainable. To address this issue, some castes resorted to recruiting underage girls as brides for these men, thus preserving endogamy and the caste numerical strength. Dr. Ambedkar argued that these measures, though diverse, these measures were unified by their shared objective, maintaining the endogamous nature of caste, which in turn perpetuates the caste system itself. Through these insights, he revealed the systematic inhumanity of caste and its mechanism of control, highlighting how it dehumanizes individuals for the sake of preserving social hierarchy. Dr. Ambedkar argues that caste system was maintained through practices like sati, enforced widowhood, and child marriages, which he perceived as a means to uphold endogamy. These customs, Baba Sahib suggested, these customs were not ideals in themselves, but were idealized to justify their practice and sustain the caste system's rigid structure. It was a deliberate construction. It was a deliberate construction aimed at preserving class privilege and social hierarchy. Baba Sahib highlighted that society is always divided into classes and that caste was essentially an enclosed class, marking a stark separation between groups and reinforcing inequality. He dismissed simplistic explanations for the genesis and spread of caste, emphasizing that caste was neither a divine imposition nor natural social evolution. Instead, it was a deliberate construction aimed at preserving class privilege and social hierarchy. He highlighted that society is always divided into classes and that caste was essentially an enclosed class, marking a stark separation between groups and reinforcing inequality. He argued that every country has its lawgiver, an incarnation who emerges during times of crisis to provide laws for justice and morality. In India, this figure is Manu. According to Ambedkar, caste existed long before Manu's time. What Manu did was codify existing caste rules and uphold them, giving them religious sanction. Dr. Ambedkar rejected the notion that the caste system was deliberately imposed on Indian society by a single person or even by a specific group. He argued that the caste system spread and deep entrenchment, they were too vast and too complex to be the result of anyone or any individuals or groups' deliberate actions. He highlighted that the unjust and divisive nature of Manu's code, which elevated some to the pinnacle of society while degrading others to the status of brutes. Dr. Ambedkar believed that this kind of social inequality codified in Manu's laws, where one class is elevated to the highest social position while others are degraded to the status of near servitude. It was so unjust and oppressive that no society would willingly accept it unless it was imposed through force or tyranny. Dr. Ambedkar questioned how a society could voluntarily submit to rules that strip certain groups of their dignity and rights while granting unchecked privileges to others. He suggested that for such blatantly unequal laws to take root, they would have required an environment of oppression where dissent was suppressed and complaints was enforced. This is because human beings in their natural state, they would not agree to such vast disparities in power and status without some form of compulsion or fear. Dr. Ambedkar also critiqued the belief that caste was justified by religious texts like the Shastras or caste was divinely ordained. He criticized both. He doesn't accept neither Shastras or divinely ordained caste. He argued that this misconception, it perpetuated caste endurance and sanctity despite being devoid of scientific or moral justification. Dr. Ambedkar provided a detailed explanation of how caste is not a single isolated entity, but it is rather a system composed of many interconnected castes. He argued that castes are formed through a mechanistic process, meaning that their formation follows a predictable pattern rooted in exclusion and segregation. When one group chooses to isolate itself to maintain practices like endogamy, it inadvertently excludes others. These excluded individuals or these excluded groups, they are unable to reintegrate into the original caste. They are forced to form their own separate caste. Over time, this pattern repeats, creating multiple castes within the same society. Dr. Ambedkar highlighted how the rigid rules of caste further complicate this process. The rules do not differentiate between different types of offenses. Whether someone challenges traditional norms, introduces new religious or social ideas, or simply violates a caste code. In all cases, the punishment is the same, casting out. This act of casting out dissenters ensures that those who deviate from the established order, they cannot reintegrate into their original caste, leading to the formation of new caste. This cycle of exclusion and fragmentation, it results in the proliferation of caste, making Indian society deeply fragmented and complex. Dr. Ambedkar's analysis underscores how caste is not static but a dynamic system that continues to divide society as new castes emerge through mechanisms of exclusion and rejection. This, he explained, this is why the caste system is so deeply entrenched and difficult to dismantle. It perpetuates itself through an ongoing process of division and replication. Dr. Ambedkar critiqued earlier studies of caste for their superficial understanding, particularly the European scholars. Their focus is on color. The European scholars focuses on color prejudices, which he dismissed as irrelevant. Instead, he proposed that caste originated from a cultural process involving exocommunication, imitation, and rigid social stratification. He concluded that this theory of caste, while comprehensive, it was a contribution to the discussion, subject to revision and further analysis. He exposes the caste system as a mechanism of power perpetuated by a complex interplay of psychological and mechanistic process. Dr. Ambedkar's findings, they resonate with his unwavering belief in liberty, equality, and fraternity. They remind us that the fight against caste, it is not just a social battle, but a moral obligation to dismantle injustice and build a society grounded in the democratic values. His insights contribute to inspire and guide us toward a more inclusive and egalitarian future. These findings serve as a powerful call to action, urging society to reflect on its historical wrongs and strive for transformative in the spirit of Dr. Ambedkar's vision. Thank you. Thank you.